Hey, welcome, David here. Got DeShean Yehuda here in the Democratic debate. We're here in Detroit. Any of my regular viewers knows I was on scene. I got Tulsi Gabbard. I went to her after party. I met her. It was a great honor. People know that I'm a big fan of Gabbard. And there's an ADL event on Thursday with a lot of the liberal rabbis that I posted on, and I got some of the street protests, and I got Infowars and different issues. But because of that, we didn't stream last week. And as you know, people in the streaming sphere know that YouTube has changed their uh, streaming regulation now, so no longer is it so simple to stream. So I'm just using now the YouTube Go Live, which doesn't allow me to screen share or different benefits. So I just have the microphone and camera plugged in. So I hope that's working right. And I've downloaded OBS. I think I have OBS working, but because we're just filming and talking without any screen share or having any guests, that I didn't think I needed for tonight. So hopefully that's going to go well. It might take a few minutes for viewers to pile in because I wasn't able to pre-tell people that this is going to be the location. So let's jump right in. And DeShean, what do you think about the Democratic debates in Detroit last week?
Well, the Democratic debates in Detroit was pretty unenthusiastic. I was invited initially, but wasn't able to make it because of the demand for tickets. But looking at the Democratic debates on television, I was pretty glad that I didn't attend live because I would have been very disappointed. I looked at all the candidates that was available, um, and not to sound cliche, but the only fighting chance that the Democrats have is Joe Biden because his direct experience in the political realm, working under the Obama administration. The other candidates seem unqualified in several different ways from one reason or another. Lack of experience, lack of political vision. A lot of the candidates, in my opinion, don't have the ability to see far enough down the road. And it's just a bad idea to have somebody that's not qualified in the seat of power with a finger on the button, pretty say, making major military decisions, major economic decisions for the masses of people when they don't really quite have a good concept of what that type of power entails.
Okay, yeah, I'm just because of the new regulations, I wasn't able to set it up like in the past. So it'll take a few minutes for people to come in. What do you think about the protest or the activity or just kind of the non-event that was here in Detroit, but there didn't seem much interaction between Detroiters and the people who just happened to appear in Detroit for the debates? But was there actually any on the foot on the ground grassroots interaction that you felt where Detroiters' voices were being heard?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that I was citing early is that I don't think it was very reflective of what the city of Detroit, as far as the Democratic perspective is about. I just think that a lot of people with detached mentalities were trying to capitalize off the Motor City and its rich history of unionization, political organizing, and political astuteness. Detroit was heavy in several different major elections, Obama being one, but we can kind of rewind a little bit to the Reagan era. The 1980 Republican presidential convention was in Detroit, Michigan. In this particular group of candidates just didn't reach the people. It was a lack of participation by local Detroiters. I was one of the local people from the university that I attend, Wayne State, that went down there. So I know it was an enclave of people from the school, but it was just a big draw. It was just dry, so to speak. Like it wasn't anything that was promising. The candidates just failed to reach the populace, and I just think that in particular, Kamala Harris was very convincing in her presentation. Of the issues.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. People are complaining that the audio is not so great. So I've been trying to do this a few different ways, and I hope that I'm set up right. If you're, I only got 3 people watching now. If you just clarify if the sound is all right, or else I'm going to have to restart this stream. So I apologize for the technology. People who are streaming know that technology's been changed this week.
Well, somebody said it sounds good now, so let's go with it because we don't want to break in the middle of having people expect to hear what we have to say.
Okay, so people are saying the sound sounds better. I apologize about this, and we wanted to get the stream out today, and we both had busy days, and the new change in rules. So we appreciate people tuning in, and there's a lot to talk about. We try to be interactive, and I just want to make sure that the sound's working and there's no issues with any of the new changes in Google rules. So apologize about the slow start. So I was pretty satisfied with my on the ground reporting, and I didn't expect any of the people to have a great connection with Detroiters and what was going on. Like, to me, the Democratic Party is pretty detached. That's why I'm a Gabbard fan. I like Andrew Yang and Gabbard. I mean, Biden's an old school politician. Biden and Clinton had been out here. Cory Booker also been to the Yeshiva Beth Yehuda dinner of the local Orthodox or Jewish group, and he's spoken to. Biden came to speak to the Jewish audience as vice president, and Cory Booker, a few years ago. I know Booker came and he was in Eastern Market, and we talked about the NAACP conference a few weeks ago, the last time we streamed, and there was a big audience of people that were interested in coming to the NAACP conference. But as we discussed last time, that it's unlikely the NAACP has real grassroots support here in Detroit. And I don't know, did you want to go down like candidates or different views or different issues?
I want to say first and foremost that the whole concept of being a political representative or a politician has went somewhere else. It's a whole endeavor of social climbing. At one particular point in time, political representatives and politicians were for the people. Like, politics is an industry of service, but now it's just an institution of social climbing, and all the candidates that you just mentioned, like Booker, Kamala Harris, others, either they were inexperienced or ingenuine. That's the way that I perceive all the candidates. Joe Biden was basically the most consistent person because he knows how to frame the political discourse, and I just think that could be problematic because ideals are one thing, but a practical application is another thing. And, it has to be sound leadership. We have had a lot of things happen, a lot of broken promises and failed expectations. Like I mentioned in a few other podcasts, that Obama really didn't live up to the expectations of the Black community. A lot of his idealism didn't trickle down to Main Street. It was just certain demographics that benefited from his presidency, and that must be very clear. I was in the midst of my undergrad degree when he was in office. Black students in particular and others in the African American business community saw little to no progress, and these are overlooked issues. A lot of people made a lot of excuses, and I'm looking at this current group of candidates, and they trying to fall under that umbrella of excuses and using the presidency strictly as a ladder to pull themselves up in social climbing.
Yeah, I mean, we could get into the psychology of the candidates and what they think they're changing. Obviously, people who follow me know that I'm not such a fan of the current system and don't think there's going to be much of an ability to save America or the system from within, and that none of these candidates are going to be able to do anything. And so, kind of like a popularity contest of which one do you like, or more like which one do you have an in with? Because as you increase in power, maybe you have connections, and you say, okay, like I'm more connected with one candidate than the next, and it'll be beneficial to me and my group of people. Should that candidate enter power, but I do follow issues, and we were going to talk about the dynamics of class. Like everyone knows the racial dynamics, and we saw the statistics like Biden has almost half of the African American vote. There's DeShean was mentioning President Obama. Obviously, it makes sense why there was huge support in the African American community for President Obama, the very first African American president. And at this point, it's unclear whether the African American community would fall behind, Booker or Harris, or if they prefer Biden. So it seems right now the polling is very clear that the African American community that is overwhelmingly Democratic overwhelmingly favors Biden, and even a minority, compared to the demographics, that there's a minority of African Americans that favor Harris or Booker.
Well, just to refer to the statement that you just made, the whole new class dynamics is about who is benefiting from the system. The current political system right now for African Americans under the Trump administration, it's like a wild card. It's better than it's been in a long time because of the restriction of cheap labor. Like illegal immigrants drive down the price of wages for people that's seeking jobs in the low-skilled job market. And, highly skilled immigrants is a whole different conversation, but that's just one thing that wasn't expected to happen, but it's occurring. So with a Democratic change in the guard, are we going back to the old ways of doing things, where business as usual is resuming? I don't think people is really interested in that position, because the new dynamics, from what I see, the class system is based off of is inherited wealth. It was a point in time where people was expected to work hard and to improve their skill set, and that's still somewhat true, but the majority of people who possess the preferable positions in the class system are all people who largely inherit or marry into situations where they have this infusion of access that they didn't have before. And I think that somebody mentioned in the past, I can't remember who it was, that the new grade used to be an ABC system, but it's been matriculated down to E, which means entitlement. Like people feel entitled, like, people don't want to fail, people don't want to be corrected, people don't want to be critically evaluated. And I think that's becoming problematic, because it's been suggested in other publications in the past that the ruling class don't possess the skill set to sustain themselves. It's the creative and intellectual class, as well as the working classes, who uphold the ruling class. And, I think that, for better or worse, under the Trump administration, it's kind of like the playing field is leveling out, because people that were previously shut out under other political regimes have access now. A lot of people have re-entered the workforce, starting at the low end job market, going up through the skilled trades into even the university level. So this is a thing that's going to be a leverager in the upcoming 2020 presidential election, because numbers don't lie. People have to respect those positive changes, because you only can politicize so much, but at the end of the day, it's about what works versus theory.
Yeah, the people who watch these streams, or you get information from any of the talking heads, as generally widely evident, Sanders pushed the party further to the left. Democratic socialism Biden, possibly a few of the other minor candidates, are towing the old school party line, and Biden's the only one of those candidates towing the old school pre-Sanders Democratic line that's viable. All the other mainstream candidates are basically post-Sanders, largely Democratic socialist, and have fallen into the only way for America to continue is as a welfare state. And I've talked at length, and I kind of like Andrew Yang and his UBI and these concepts. That would be yes, America as a welfare state is inevitable due to technological and demographic and technocratic and bureaucratic changes. Um, and very few of the candidates actually would probably be able to implement those type of policies. Although, yeah, I kind of like Sanders. He's got a good vision and a good heart. Whether he would be a good technocrat or bureaucrat, legislator, it's unclear. Elizabeth Warren probably has superior legislative ability. Andrew Yang with the UBI and automation, he's probably the only one on that stage who actually understood the technological changes and how that's going to affect politics. So as as a technology uh, fan, it's very difficult to listen to any of these people who don't understand technology. So Yang is like a breath of fresh air. And my personal preference for Tulsi Gabbard is more like spiritual, that it's just kind of miraculous to see her up there, and not necessarily based on my thought that she actually would have a good ability to govern. She might be a good commander in chief in terms of keeping America out of foreign wars or not being corruptible, and possibly the role of president, being able to govern, manage budgets, and these things actually is not that much of an important role for a president. So it's more my emotional attachment to Tulsi. So I mean, that might about do it for our review. I mean, of
But I want to mention this: the African American wild card in the election is because, like I stated earlier, people that have re-entered the workforce on all three levels, from the low skill to the skill to the educational level. People, the African American community spends a lot of money. It's a big consumer based group. So if people redirect their focus to entrepreneurial pursuits, then you have growth stimulation. And that's something that's very valuable as well as powerful, that can push Trump in for a second term as president, because under his watch, the African American unemployment rate has dropped significantly. And people would deny it, just like they had to come to Detroit for this debate, because miscalculations from the last presidential election, when Hillary Clinton lost, was directly influenced by the lack of presence in Detroit. And like I said earlier, they still didn't do a good job in reflecting the issues at hand. Like, they came here to try to seize the opportunity, but they didn't convey those messages that people were expecting. And that's what even is putting Trump in a very good position, politically, because irregardless of what the other issues are, domestic issues are the utmost important. People vote their own interests. The pocketbook is of concern, and social programming without any resource doesn't work. And I just think that people is starting to get away from like the over social programming. Corporate America doesn't want to be taxed out of control again. Like, the system has basically been reworked, and every critic along the way has said that it wouldn't work, but it seems to be in place. The stock market is doing well. People are entering the workforce, and so the old ideal and assumption is stick to what works. Because to go back and try to fix something that isn't broke, it's just not a good idea.
Yeah, 'cause, I mean, we both have our own initiative and desire and ambition, and are relatively hardworking, don't mind working, and hence we lean right. But the likelihood that the larger American community, minority community, blue state community is going to do that um, remains unclear. And polling would show that the likelihood is that America is going to vote to turn itself into a welfare state. and also the possibility that it could work out with the UBI and automation, that you could have a viable welfare state in America. And God forbid that relates to the El Paso shooter, to a lot of these demographic change or the alt-right type issues of right-wing people that absolutely do not want America to be turned into a welfare state. Um, so I mean that will remain unclear. That despite your ambition and your desire to work and get ahead, that the majority of Americans will not decide that it's too difficult to get ahead. The amount of work required to get ahead is became too much. The educational challenge, technology is too advanced. Just like the YouTube streaming. Now you got to be like a programmer just to be able to YouTube stream and all these various things where people be like, if you could just give me my $1,000 a month, have a viable health care, a $15 minimum wage, or so on and so on, that would be preferable to fixing the system and creating a balanced structure where people, based upon their own merit and initiative, would be able to get ahead.
Well, let me reiterate. Like, people were surprised when Donald Trump came to Detroit for the very first time, and it's those business owners and entrepreneurial class that tipped the election in Michigan. People fail to realize that African Americans in the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan are some of the wealthiest African Americans in the world. And people are going to vote in their own best interest. Even at Donald Trump's most unfavorable time in the black community, when he came to that mega church the first time, he was received in a very neutral way. But a lot of people since then have been won over. Like, you starting to see a trickle of people that's coming out the closet, so to speak, in favor of Trump. Like, I was down at the Detroit City bus station, Rosa Parks, and I seen a guy who was clearly African American, had a "Make America Great Again" hat on. And people are not getting attacked in the streets of Detroit for those hats. Like, other cities might be different, but I'm just saying Detroit has a different flavor per se. And like, even during the automobile industry's boom, the middle class was created largely by African Americans and others. And so people discount Detroit as being a city of substance and have possessed wealth and continues to possess wealth. That's what has to be articulated, because you're not dealing with indigent people. There are a lot of poor people in the city, but the flip side of the story is that they don't talk about the necessary well-to-do and upwardly mobile African Americans. And that's what's going to come out in this next election, because it's certain segments of Detroit that have very, very high incomes, just like this neighborhood do. It has a per median income of over $100,000 a year. So that's what has to be taken into account in the mainstream. And if the Democrats were smart, and I'm a moderate, so like I try to stay dead center middle, they would have capitalized off that more so than come with a lot of the same rhetoric of the past that people was already not trusting in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's why you lean right and you're more entrepreneurial. And the statistics of what percentage of people are entrepreneurial versus saying if the Democratic Party were smart, they would look at the polling and recognize that people want a welfare state, they want a social safety net, and most of the people are scared of their ability to get ahead in this ever-changing world and are more looking for that social safety net. And whether that's your minority community or even the larger white community that might support Sanders and even Donald Trump, even pushing back against old school capitalism, saying we don't want people dying in the street, and supportive of this social safety net. And I think the demographics would show that the majority of people do not feel that if they had an even playing field, that they're going to be able to get ahead, that the system is rigged, and they're more likely to support some sort of minimal social safety net, UBI, welfare state. And so I'm not sure what data you're looking at versus maybe your own personal feel of what you desire for yourself.
No, that's
you're
not
saying
true.
Like a few people in Detroit, and not even just talking about minorities in Detroit, but the spirit across America is people
Well,
want,
let me share this.
people are not sure that there's going to be a path forward for them to succeed, and they want a social safety net.
Well, you got to ask which class you're talking about, because yeah, if you're talking about retirees, people want their Social Security and health care in place, but the younger demographic of people that's high school age throughout the mid 30 range is willing to take more of a financial risk and chance in pursuit of greater gains. So you have to break it down on the chart to see exactly which area you're talking about, because a welfare state limits the opportunity for advancement. Like, we all know what happened in systems like the former Soviet Union that kind of fell apart. Communism is not a solution. You need domestic policies and opportunities to ensure the security of the society at large, because when everybody is the same, then nobody gets ahead. And that has to be continued to be re-emphasized, because there's no one fix it. One solution for all is not going to work.
Yeah, I mean, we could go back and forth on this, but I mean, I'm not set up to do a screen share because I'm just doing the Google Web and not OBS. But to look at the polling data and see, what is the reality? What do people want? Do people want an even playing field to get ahead, or do people want a social safety net or some sort of combination of both? And if they were forced to choose between the two, what's going to be more important to them? That fixing the system so it's not rigged and that makes it possible that everybody, no matter what background, can get ahead, or leaning towards wanting to make sure that they're not going to be, God forbid, poor, homeless, without health care. And if they could only choose between one of the two, what's going to be more important, the level playing field to get ahead or the social safety net?
Well, I don't think it's ever going to be that simple. That's an oversimplification. People want the opportunity. A lot of people that are out there in bad situations, indigent, homeless, yeah, there's a dynamic to groupthink, but a lot of people just don't put forth the effort, and they lose their social safety nets and what little support they had in the beginning, and then they end up out there with no one to turn to. I've personally seen that in my day-to-day travels. There's a lot of reasons why people ended up in that situation, but if a person has any type of collective power dynamic going on, they will seek out help through various networks of people, whether they be black or white. That's what trade unions are about. That's what, the university is about, academia. That's what, small business is about, commerce and mercantile societies, collective bargaining, collective economics, collective ambition, collective visioning. So yeah, it's never going to be a simple choice in the matter. It's about what a person wants and the future that they're going to make for themselves. That's what it's about.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to understand what's going through people's heads. What are the main decisions that they're factoring forward? And that's, to me, like in essence, Andrew Yang is the only interesting candidate that's really looking at the issues facing people. I mean, everyone's looking at issues facing people, but the automation, the changes of technology, globalization. How are we going to deal with these issues, and what does it take to get ahead these days? What does it mean to be an entrepreneur? The role of technology, the role of education. If you give people free education, how are they going to be able to get ahead with that free education? Is that what people want? To raise minimum wage so that people could work and be middle class, working jobs where the market rate really isn't that. And how does immigration fit in that? Regarding just the fact of globalization, that there's people around the world willing to do those jobs for so much cheaper. How could you give $15 minimum wage when you could, God forbid, have open borders and have people that would do the job for $5 an hour, maybe even $2 an hour? And there's a lot of complicated issues that really there is no solution for. So the push on the right versus the push on the left is a polarization that neither side, in my opinion, is really addressing the issues coming forth. There are good ideas from a whole bunch of people, and let alone the racial divide, the culture wars, the direction of America, whether demographic change, so to say, the browning of America, does that matter? And these issues of, should we move to a socialist government, or should there be a pushback for strong capitalism? What does it mean to be a Republican anymore? And it's just like it's unclear what does it mean to be a Democrat now. It's unclear what does it mean to be a Republican.
Well, just rewind a little bit. Like those are old ideals about open borders and lower wages, but the African American community has largely always been an innovative class. It was the Democrats in the South who was used to free labor and exploitation, and the magic word is pay. The Civil War occurred because of taxation, unionization. There's no such thing as free labor. The sooner a person realizes that, the better off they'll be, because skills and time and energy comes from somewhere. And, this over paranoia of, it's not going to be enough to go around. Like, actually, if America focuses on its own self instead of trying to be everything to everybody else, like, i.e., the Donald Trump narrative, then we will receive some type of increase, which we're seeing now. Like it's evident that Wall Street is still pretty stable. It's evident that the African American unemployment numbers are dropping, and we have to address our own issues first before we can overextend ourselves, because it's so few people under those other regimes, like democratic decision makers. Yeah, they possess governmental contracts. So basically, it's governmental capitalism under the guise of social programming that is being practiced versus a free market. That's what they don't want, is competition. So I won't let them guys off the hook that easy, because under the guise of social programming, they are yet practicing a form of capitalism that's even more harmful than what they accuse the current system of being.
Yeah, so we could go back and forth on this, and you guys probably know how I feel and how DeShean feels. Um, if there's any questions directly in the chat, you could add Dubit and make sure to read it. It seems like people are just talking to each other. There are some local Detroit issues or possible relation to the Jewish community. And do you have any further thoughts on how the class dynamic is going to play out in these elections?
Yeah, it's going to be like right now it's an identity crisis. A lot of historical ethnic groups who at one particular point in time were considered to be non-white, who did assimilate into the white mainstream. It's a backlash. Like, at one particular time, ethnic whites like the Irish and European Jewish communities were not considered white, but they kind of assimilated into the WASP, white Anglo-Saxon mainstream. But I think now, amongst those people who have achieved a certain respectability in society, those old issues are resurfacing about who is black and who is white. It's clearly defined what and who African Americans are, but other groups, like the race card, got kind of convoluted and blurred. So a lot of people is trying to re-emphasize and highlight what that criteria is. And, frankly, I think that, again, racism is a smokescreen of economic classism, because if you control commerce and commodity, then that's a preferable position. Nobody really cares about what that face of control looks like, other than people that's competing for that control.
Okay, well, obviously, a lot of people on my channel disagree, and that's what the common. Eke, who was here earlier, if he's still watching, he always said that he wants to be ruled by his own, not necessarily the most qualified candidate. And you do have that element in all communities, not just now rising in the white community as the demographic shift, but certainly historically, in the Jewish community, there's always complaints.
I
Like,
understand
look,
where
we
you're going
have
with that.
non-Jewish people that are
That's the
leading the
Louis
federation.
Farrakhan theory.
You have African Americans that say, like, I don't care who's the most qualified. I want to be led by my own.
Well, yeah, but that only goes so far because, you know, being on a train that's been manned and driven by an unqualified person is only going to lead to major disaster and train wreck. So that only goes so far. You know, if you can try to find the most qualified person in your own ranks, that's fine. Like this is what anti-integrationists say. You know, because there were benefits economically to segregation. Like you have Black Wall Street, you had a lot of monies in the African American community, and a lot of people want to go back to them old systems. Like you could look at every community. You know, this is what the Louis Farrakhan narrative is about: is collective economics, segregation versus integration, and we can go on and on, like you said. But like that exists across the board. But at some point in time, economically, everybody is going to have to integrate, and just for purposes of commerce and free markets. But social integration and segregation is a whole nother concept. You know, like I think people don't understand the economic from the social. That's a very confused area, and that has to be defined.
Yeah. So, foreign policy in Israel wasn't mentioned really over the debates. I mean, did you want to comment more on how disconnected the larger Democratic candidates seem from Detroit? Like we know here in Detroit, you have,
Yes.
so to say, the gentrification. You know, Dan Gilbert, the wealthiest person, the largest landowner of Quicken Loans, buying up buildings, making luxury condominiums and rental places, and trying to get wealthy people to come into the city, make it a place that's amicable to, you know, yuppies and
Well, let me speak on that a little bit.
maybe say whiter people moving in, and as opposed to the African American majority that has largely controlled Detroit, and it might come into that: do you want to be ruled by your own, or do you want to bring in foreign elites to run your society?
Well, let me
And
say
how are the
something. Let me
foreign
respond to
elites-
what you just said.
and
That
just related to the debates that happened where they closed down. I mean, I was out there on the street. They closed down the streets for blocks away. You had to have a pass, and it was really an event for the elites where you had the Democrats talking about how they're going to rule from on high, in theory to benefit everybody, but it seemed that they were pretty distant.
well, you know, let me explain this thoroughly. You know, the current regime of Democrat leadership has all been compromised, with the exception of a very, very, very few. So when you got these people who have been bought and paid for lock, stock, and barrel, they can say anything. I think that you over racialize too many things that don't particularly pertain to race, because at the end of the day, it's about who controls the money and access to the system. And, you know, if I was just to focus on race per se, I will be missing the big picture and impoverishing myself. You know, racial rhetoric and investment outside of my own self is kind of a prescription for poverty, and I'm not interested in being poor. So I have to interact with those who are qualified across the board, while yet having a cultural knowledge of who I am and what role I play in society. You know, it's not a big deal that I'm at a historical disadvantage. That's why I have risen up and succeeded all expectations. I love opposition that don't expect much, because it's not really what they think about me, but rather what I think about them. That's the perspective of the upwardly mobile, because you create your own social network, your own demographic. You control your narrative. You control your commerce. You control, you know, the outlook that society has on you. And I just think that, you know, the big C word, control, is more prevalent than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, tough issues. So, I mean, there's a lot. We'll see how that plays going in the week forward. And there's so many different dynamics where some people think that people have different issues that they think are the most important. And I like to analyze them issue by issue. That's why largely I stay neutral and more analysis, trying to understand what's going on, try to help people make good decisions without being locked into backing people or backing parties or backing ideas that may be failed or ideas that may appear to be good. And as time goes on, demonstrate that they're not so good.
Well, yeah, I can totally align with that because you know everything is pretty up for grabs. Like in every dispensation of time, each time in history defines itself. Each generation thought that their generation was actually the last generation, but life continued to go on. So, like, I totally want to put that out there in the sense that it's the you do yourself an injustice when you think that your meager existence in the machine is the end all to everything. That's not a good or intelligent place to be.
Yeah, so you got some topics in the chat about mixed blooded and I guess our viewership is a little bit down due to the failure that the new YouTube rules, so I wasn't able to advertise this in advance. But this will be up there in perpetuity for people who view in later. Hypatia, who I made a moderator just to try to keep people, unfortunately, get a lot of trolls in the
Right,
chat.
right. Can I answer one important question that I deem is important? Somebody asked, what is Detroit's major industries besides automotive? Number one is agricultural. You have the Kellogg cereal company that's largely an agri company that's multinational. You have like a lot of the industrial farmers here. You have, more on the cultural side, the record industry, the publishing industry is huge. So there's a lot of industry in Detroit that create a whole lot of wealth that people necessarily don't know about. We have a shipping port, which is one of the largest domestic shipping ports in the world. We are a stone's throw away from Canada. And Detroit has a lot of innovation and technology as well, medical innovation. We have one of the most prolific research institutions in the world, which was the first institution that came up with an FDA approved drug for the AIDS virus, and that's Wayne State University, the medical school. So, if you want to look at Detroit's accomplishments, it's just too many to name. You can spend 2 weeks on this subject and still only scratch the surface.
Yeah, I mean, employment-wise, the hospitals are the biggest employers. The auto industry historically had been the biggest. Now, I joke the big three now is no longer GM, Chrysler, and Ford. It's MGM, Greektown, in the Motor City casinos, as the casinos have became the big businesses here. The auto industry has become globalized. There's been a lot of competition. However, the Society of Automotive Engineers is still largely based out of Detroit. A lot of the testing grounds, proving grounds are still based in Detroit. Engineering collaboration among different companies. So there certainly is the auto industry, although it's much less here in Detroit, is probably still biggest in Detroit than anywhere else in the world. The rise of the hospitals is probably also somewhat dependent upon the welfare state because you don't have to be able to afford your health care to have health care. So, if you look at Michigan's biggest employers or Detroit's biggest employers, I believe they're actually hospitals. There's different types of manufacturing, entertainment, shipping. We're on the river. We're next to Canada. I believe the Canadian U.S. bridge is one of the biggest transport hubs for goods that come from Canada into America. So there's logistics and shipping and all sorts of things. I mean, Detroit's still a top 20 town in the U.S. Like you have not necessarily in Detroit itself, but Detroit connection to other parts of Michigan for logistics. You have the furniture making and up north, timber, coal. Um,
Salt.
yeah, I mean, University of Michigan, Metro Detroit, educational research facility. So, there's a lot to be bullish on Detroit for.
Oh yeah. And see, the wealth concentration of Detroit has been here ever since the inception of fur trappers from Montreal. Like Detroit was actually a viable city even before the United States was declared a sovereign nation. That's another little well-known fact. Like the big industrial money in the first century all came and chose to have residence in Detroit. Like Duva said, for strategic reasons.
Yeah, geographic reasons. I'm saying Detroit, regardless of how poorly it was managed or different reasons for the rise and fall of Detroit, Detroit is the most geographic, strategic place to have a city within hundreds and hundreds of miles. It's right on the, Detroit is the three rivers, why originally the French settlement and
Mm-hmm.
the Native American Indians were settled here for thousands of years going back historically. So Detroit will always be the metro area in Michigan just due to geographic reasons.
Right, and also one other little known fact is weapons manufacturing. Detroit itself literally won World War II for the United States of America. It's called the Arsenal of Democracy. These days, you have aerospace weaponry, which is nuclear technologies. So basically, you have that component as well. Um, and Detroit has always been big business. Like the Detroit Union money is the money that built Las Vegas, literally, you know, as well as components in Hollywood, the creative industries, that's associated with marketing and advertising, you know. So like you have a lot of uber wealthy people in the suburbs of Detroit, just right outside of the city. And like when you talk about poverty, it's only in a concentrated area because our suburbs in Detroit, from the east side to the west side, rival any of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the world.
Yeah, and obviously Oakland County, where I am, and we're going to talk about some local politics here that involve people we actually know with the passing away of Brooks Patterson, who had been the county commissioner for decades and a Republican that was widely accused of being a racist or whatever. But certainly there's a tech hub of computer programming, technology, software, big businesses like Dow Chemical. There's a lot of stuff going on here, and the suburbs is largely related to the geographic area of Detroit, and also recently, it would appear that with global warming, Michigan is going to become a nicer and nicer place to live. That Michigan was relatively on the cold side, and if you do accept global warming, certainly like the heat wave didn't really hit Michigan, where you got those huge record high temperatures across. Michigan was hot, but due to all the water and you had precipitation, and as you move further north into Michigan, we generally have very cold, longer winters. That's likely global warming will make Michigan a more and more attractive place to live as compared to other places that might become less attractive and people migrate north. And one final point is Detroit has become like a paradise of social activism. So a lot of people, like your young gentrification, college educated people who are looking to conduct their social experiments of multiculturalism and the leftist policy, Detroit is actually a haven for like communists and leftists to come and try out their ideals. So, some of the people watching the audience with right-wing tendencies may not like that, but if you do have left-wing tendencies and wanted a testing ground for some of your ideas, that is a lot of the people coming from Europe and across America, why they're coming here to Detroit.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, dude. Like this one friend of mine who I consider a friend, but he's way far out there on the left side. And, just because you're on the left or the right really doesn't matter to me. But he made a prolific statement when he said the Great Lakes states in particular are going to become like Greek city states in the future because of water and land resource scarcity. Like everybody that has any money anywhere else is investing in infrastructure along the Great Lakes states with a large emphasis on Michigan. You got the Canadian side, you got Milwaukee, you got Chicago, you got a few other places, but Michigan definitely is self-sustainable versus a lot of other places because the agri industries, you have dairy farms, you have multiple layers of wealth here coming from a lot of different components and working parts. Like cities in Michigan are literally richer than Beverly Hills. And
Michigan was was the manufacturing hub, largely due to natural resources of timber and coal and the waterways of shipping to get here. That's why manufacturing was largely based in Cleveland and these other areas along the Great Lakes. So I'm not bullish on Michigan. I'm not bearish on Michigan at all. Michigan has a great future. Detroit has a lot of problems to work through. We're on the blue side of the divide. That's unlikely to change. There might be a rise in conservatism or different principles, but just the natural resources of the state and the geographic location, the huge water abundance, resources, natural resources. Like I haven't left Michigan. My base is here, and I'm pretty confident about that.
Yeah, I want to make a comment about African American wealth creation in the city of Detroit. With all this like classic institutional numbers, like there's always been an underground economy in the city of Detroit, starting back in the early teens to 20s. Like what became the lottery across the board started off as an African American innovation of street lotteries, where the final race at the horse track was actually the street number, and it was a large pooling of resources. Obviously, it was more money coming in and going out from people that actually picked the last horse race correctly. So, like, people are really misunderstood about the city of Detroit. You have the urban millionaires, like Duvick spoke a lot about the educated yuppies coming in, but you run into these urban millionaires who have resources from unexplained sources, and a lot of it is not drug money, it's just other little things that's just off the record that make money. Like you have your local merchants who sell incense and oils, and like you got guys that's doing $200 to $500 a day, and over time that money adds up. Like the incense sellers, the oil sellers, the bottled water sellers. Like Detroit has always been a hustler's paradise, so to speak.
Although there is probably the larger majority of even across Michigan, where people are just saying, give us the welfare state, so to say, there's always been a sizable chunk of entrepreneurs that are active and you want to push forward in creating and doing and economically capitalistic ventures, and that will continue. Urban farming has become big here recently, food, restaurants, and all types of things. So we encourage people to look into Detroit. Generally Detroit has a bad reputation, and even till today, somewhat people come to Detroit as like a like a lender of last resort, a place of refuge because it's too competitive. Like a Jewish community, it's too expensive in other places, so Detroit's more affordable. Or you largely affordability, where the huge Detroit is extremely large geographically, and you could get a plot of land, a house, make your new start for relatively cheaply. So currently, that's the largest reason why people would come to Detroit. However, also the yuppies. There's some entrepreneurials or business here in your regular businesses, specifically engineering and manufacture. And a lot of your upper middle class type people, like people in the medical fields. But yeah, we don't have to sell you on Detroit. We love Detroit. That's where we're here. We're not embarrassed to say that.
One last comment, like I just want to put this out there: the home ownership rate in the city of Detroit is way higher than other places. Like you have people that have brick and mortar home, and that's very unusual for the average person in a lot of other places to own brick homes.
Okay, yeah, I started being a little bit more harsh on the chat, where I'm starting to, I gave a few wrenches, and I'm starting to just delete comments that have nothing to do with the conversation or largely trolling for no reason, and it's probably causing me less viewership. But the long run is probably better. Jewel Citizen, who's been watching for a while and was complimented of DeShean, although he's generally pretty harsh on me, is asking to elaborate on what you said were the forces that are out to kill and annihilate white people.
Well, let me explain. Like WASP culture, like as the power equation changes hands, the race and control for power and resource sometimes become bloody, through conflict. So when I made that comment, I meant like within the Anglo WASP establishment, the historic power base that we all are familiar with, as other groups rise, wherever they be and whoever they are, the challenge to the status quo is the thing that is going to annihilate what once was considered to be the racial demographics of pure whiteness, for better words. So that's what I meant, Jules, when I made that original comment.
Okay, do we want to touch on some local issues first? We comment on, here's just an article about, God forbid there were the mass shootings and the media's making it appear that there's a big problem with white supremacy. Obviously, Detroit has very high gun death rates. Some weeks it's in upwards of, some years it could be around 400 people a year who are killed in Detroit. And unfortunately, God forbid, most of those deaths remain unsolved. The majority of murders in Detroit remain unsolved. And, so just an article, it wasn't considered a mass shooting, but, God forbid someone robbed a beauty parlor and shot 4 people. People get shot in Detroit all the time. And we talked about in the past, sort of say black on black crime. Me and DeShean are both relatively street smart people, are pretty safe. Like, I never had problems in Detroit, although we're both pretty good at avoiding problems, or good eyesight, or whatever it is.
Right. Well,
do you have a comment on these mass shootings?
Yeah.
Compared to the larger
Detroit, like the fatality rate is high per capita as far as the population, but a lot of this stuff come from control issues. Everybody wants to be kind of like the big chief. It's a city of leaders, so therefore, like, nobody wants to follow, nobody wants to surrender. Like, we're not even, like, the non-fatal shootings far outweigh the fatal shootings. You just hear about the fatal ones, but on a given year, in a population of under 1 million people, it's at least, in a conservative estimate, upwards of 2,000 non-fatal shootings, with maybe 400 of those actually being fatalities. It's a lot of wounded people. Like, people get beat up because maybe it has something to do with the whole economics of unionization. Everybody wants to run the show, and when you have disorganized anything, politics, economics, social programming, then you run into the conflicts. So therefore, Detroit is going to be a case study of, in the future, how to cooperate, how to innovate. Like, it's kind of cliche, but at the same token, it has to be the best of the elements from the past, reinvented and redefined for the future.
Yeah, so Hypatia's asking about property in Detroit. You could reach out to me separately, or maybe we'll do a whole stream one point on like how to buy real estate, or the real estate markets in Detroit. Is an interesting topic, but it's probably proper to have a whole show on that topic of how to buy real estate, or the real estate market here. Tom Anderson wanted to know your opinion on the Flint water crisis, and also Detroit. There's a lot of water shutoffs and related to a local political issue where water is included in one of these things that we plan on talking about.
Yeah, water is the new, like, gold. If water is the new oil, then Detroit is the new Saudi Arabia. The Flint water crisis was just a national embarrassment because it could have totally been prevented. The economics of the situation didn't add up, and for better words, it was just like the most extreme form of negligent governorship that could have ever been possible. I don't think you could have dreamed that up. Like, that was just pure evil, for better words, because it could have been totally prevented.
but ironically, water in Detroit is expensive, and if you do get a house, like a lot of, God forbid, so to say, poor people in Detroit have problems with their water getting shut off, or they miss payments, or something goes wrong, and they get a huge bill, and they end up with like thousands of dollars owed to the water company, and then go years or months without water. So it's a big issue in Democratic politics where water is a right, in questioning the ability of the water company to shut off, and also because when we do a stream about real estate, because Detroit is so geographically large, there's huge areas where the infrastructure is not capable of being maintained. And I'll do a stream, and maybe if DeShean's available, we'll do it together, and we'll just look at how to buy real estate in Detroit. So you could get basically property for free, or even a few dollars. And the tax assessments are largely pretty low. And I'd have to look into what the tax assessments, if they're based on market value or what data. But I mean, they're not huge. Although tax assessments are such a thing where the tax assessment and property tax might be larger than the purchase value. But the problem is that with the cheapest properties, the infrastructure hasn't been maintained, and it's too expensive for the city to maintain the infrastructure, like the roads, the water, something, the electricity, the trash pickup. And so the neighborhoods where you have dilapidated houses, blight, abandonment, the infrastructure can't be maintained, and you could purchase the houses for very little. You might have to demolish it on your own, and you can actually get a good few acres. Like with even tens of thousands of dollars, you might be able to get a few properties in a pretty blighted area of Detroit, knock down the houses. Although you might have to worry about crime, and the police may not be able to come. And that's an issue that hopefully we'll be streaming large amounts upon.
Well, yeah, a lot of truth to that.
So let's talk local politics, and we're going to first mention this. I can't screen share, but Brooks Patterson. Anyone who knows local Detroit politics, I'm not sure he ever made national news, and he had kind of been an Oakland County separatist of after, so to say, the white flight, and where Detroit, which is in Wayne County, people moved out into the suburbs, and Oakland County has more. Certainly there's a sizable amount of African Americans in Oakland County, but it's maybe like 15-20%, and it's one of the wealthiest counties in the whole country. And there was an old man who was county executive for decades, and he was not friendly to Detroit, and he passed away. And the question is, who's going to replace him? I mean, he wasn't. I mean, there are accusations of racism, accusations of anti-Semitism. He rejected those. You could look into the media and articles and see people claiming that on both sides. We know a person both reasonably well. We pray with him in synagogue, Andy Meisner, who will probably be running for the position. However, the current way is that because he died while in office, that until the next election, if that's more than a year away, they could appoint a new county executive. And so that's current politics, and it's interesting. I don't know if you have any comment on that.
Well, yeah, L. Brooks Patterson was a very peculiar character. Like, I wouldn't go so far as to call him racist. He just had that old way of doing things. And, you look at the whole of Oakland County, like Oakland County became a powerhouse for a lot of reasons. And like the current people that's running for office, like Andy Meisner and David Woodward, Andy's track record is way more extensive as the treasurer. He had a lot of fiscal success. So hands down, I see him winning the election or the seat for county executive, because people's going to trust that reliable nature, that reliable result that they so used to. And, it was just a historic battle. Like when you have power politics, like our former mayor in Detroit, Coma Alexandra Young, basically changed the whole working order of the city of Detroit, and it was so necessary at the time. So Brooks Patterson was in that group of people, and these two extremely powerful, intelligent men was just vying for control. Like back to the big C word. and neither one of them was bowing down or giving in. So yeah, certain people made those accusations on both ends of the spectrum. Coleman Young was accused of being anti-white. L. Brooks Patterson was accused of being anti-black in certain areas. But at the same token, you got to look at what occurred, because even at Detroit's bleakest time, it was still brilliant things happening. Like Coleman Young, the former mayor that passed years ago, set up the city for the future. Like at some level, everything that's happening in Detroit was one of his ideas, and a lot of the times he was redlined by Washington because he had a very open conflict with President Reagan at the time. But yet Coleman Young was a decorated war veteran and a serious patriot who believed in the rule of law. So that's another part of history that's not readily disclosed, because he was a Tuskegee Airman, which is the only black combat unit in the Air Force who had over 400 successful missions without losing one pilot. So yeah, the greater Washington political community kind of gave Coleman Young space to say things that the average politician wouldn't have been allowed to get away with, because yet he was a decorated war veteran and a Tuskegee Airman.
Either way, it's likely that there'll be some sort of greater ties between Detroit and Oakland County, even if a Republican gains the seat. Obviously, Andy Meisner, we have term limits here in Detroit, and he was in the House and the Senate, and then ran for treasurer. His mother is the mayor of Oak Park, which is the Orthodox area. Certainly he's widely popular in the Jewish community. Whether he could gain that kind of popularity among the larger Oakland County as a treasurer.
No, he hasn't. Brenda Lawrence, who's the current mayor of Southfield, is a close ally to Andy Meisner.
So she's African American. You're saying as a Democrat in the coalition of minorities, but Oakland County is about even on Republican Democrat, and so Andy Meisner lives in largely the multicultural section of Oakland County, the lower bounds that are closer to Detroit, and it includes Pontiac and different. So whether he could capture all of Oakland County and become a commissioner and lead Oakland County into the future is yet to be seen.
Well, yeah, I would give him the benefit of the doubt, because as the treasurer already, he's already been responsible for the whole county fiscally. And so it's just another elevation of his career. And, I'm sure it's different responsibilities to a certain extent, but the treasurer is a position that's nothing to snooze on. And that's a bipartisan issue. Republicans and Democrats are going to look at who's most able to balance the checkbook and keep things as they are, so to speak.
Yeah, so there was one more article I wanted to talk about, because it's related to what we talked about in past weeks about Jewish politics and what the Jewish community is going to do with the changing Democratic Party. And this is from JTA, the Jewish Telegraph Agency National, and because of the Democratic debates, Ron Campamos, who's a part of a national Jewish organization, came and spoke to the leaders of our community, and wrote an article in the JTA and mentioned his experience in being in Detroit and dealing with the leaders of the Jewish community. And he mentioned he had special meetings with the Federation and different leaders and major donors. And the number one thing with the institutionalized Judaism, which is definitely pure democratic, the Jewish news, even the Orthodox community, the institutionalized Orthodox community in Metro Detroit is a Democrat, is the head of Yeshiva Beth Yehuda is a Democrat. So there are some Republicans or people that might vote Republican. But however, in New York, where you have institutionalized Orthodox institutes that are Republican, here institutional Judaism, even on the Orthodox side, is Democratic. However, so the article says that the community, basically their number one issue is getting rid of Rashida Tlaib. Quoted the head of the Federation, we in this community will go against Rashida Tlaib. Lisa Lease, the philanthropist who is also contributor to Democratic candidates. I think she's head of the Federation. So that they're looking, like DeShean mentioned, trying to get Brenda Jones to try to primary her again, and then which is probably the position of the institutionalized Democratic Jewish representatives here in Metro Detroit, because the Jewish community of institutionalized are Democrats,
Well,
and they don't know who to support. And Israel is an important issue, and so here we have like our Detroit Jews for Justice, which I actually got on my YouTube page, protesting with the immigrations, and there's female rabbi. She's been on my page a few times at different events, and Rabbi Alpert, who does not officially represent the Jewish community, but is a popular rabbi, says it's not about Rashida, who worked closely with Rashida Tlaib and Andy Levin, the nephew of Carl Levin, son of Sandy Levin, took over his seat. On social justice issues like water access, transit, workers' rights, and foreclosures. It's about Jews making alliances with communities of color and not getting distracted by differences of opinion. When one agrees 80-90% of the issues with Tlaib, Tlaib has the support of younger Jewish people moving back into Detroit from the suburbs. We will be losing the next generation of Jews. To think we would spend energy to bring her down is deranged.
Well, let me jump in right now, because I'm not in favor of that. Rashida Tlaib politically is an outsider in the city of Detroit. Her demographic is not heavily represented amongst her district. It's more African American and Latino, because I'm personally in that district, and the Jewish community and African American community were historic partners in a lot of the civil rights struggles. So it becomes complicated how people latch on to the word color. You may have color, but you are not a person of color from the perspective of an African American, because when Jim Crow was heavily in effect, you didn't see none of the so-called other colored folks showing up like the other demographics, with the exceptions of Latino Americans who were prominent in the civil rights movement as well, side by side. So that becomes problematic, because, and like we taking all ethnicity off the table, we just saying strictly political. It's questions about Rashida Tlaib's capabilities to be a leader in the community. And so yeah, I can totally understand the concern that there's better qualified candidates out there, because people are going to use anything, but you know what says who, like anybody that's supporting her in a way that's saying that she's the woman to lead the way. In my opinion, I would definitely have to question their judgment or agenda, because, you said a key word, young people that's coming into the city. So are they rooted here, or are they new arrivals, so to speak? And how does the constituency, like myself, who's been here all along, we never had any personal contact with Rashida Tlaib. Her ascendancy and presence in the community has been minuscule. I'm sure she has tried to cater to her constituency and people that was in support of her, obviously because she's a politician. And frankly, I just think she's just another carpetbagger coming into the city who don't have the best interest of the people that have been here, the host population.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like Tlaib, apolitical, but I think it's good for America. It's actually going to be good for Jews to have a Palestinian in the Congress and having her voice amplified. And long term, I think it's going to be the downturn of institutionalized Jewry, that they're going to lose the battle against Tlaib. That the Democratic Party, she's probably going to long term be successful and popular. There might be certain dynamics between the African American community and like the newer squad versus the older school kind of African caucus in the Democratic Party versus the newer squad that might have differentiation with the older school Democratic African caucus. But likely, my prediction is the efforts of the institutionalized Jewish community to upseat Tlaib will fail. it will backfire at their strength in the Democratic Party. And that's what Rabbi Alpert was saying. The issues that they care about on the local level, they could work together with Tlaib, and so the Republicans or people who say Israel's their main issue, and they want to get rid of Tlaib because their views on Israel. The Democratic Party is very unlikely to look at Israel as an issue. So if Tlaib is successful at delivering to her constituencies, the Jewish wing of the Democratic Party trying to push her out because of her views on Israel will likely just backfire on her.
Well, I got to make a comment because I totally disagree. For me, it's a matter of skill set, and both groups who support her are not massive enough to really continue to carry her without any real results. Like, what is the host population going to get out of it? What benefit is the city of Detroit going to receive representing the city of Detroit? So therefore, like, I totally think that she doesn't have the skill set that's necessary to do the same job as, for instance, others who are in office who might agree with her. Okay, but at the same token, there's no historical connection between the African American and Palestinian communities. Like, these new alliances are just what they are, new alliances. And frankly, in my estimation, that any type of partnership between African Americans and Palestinians is going to lead to African American disenfranchisement, because the few allies that we do have across the board are going to walk away from those relationships if we are viewed and deemed as disloyal or unscrupulous.
There could be multiple reasons why I think you're incorrect, and one would be the Black Caucus in Congress is largely older, lifetime politicians that are pushing for policies that don't meet the new progressive agenda. And because these people have had a lock, like your Maxine Waters, John Lewis, Conyers.
It's a question there. I want to hold.
These are people that have.
We gonna get back.
These are people that have been in power for decades, are unlikely to relinquish their power to younger African American voices, and so the new progressive voice that might be more popular among a younger voice could be seen by Tlaib, and also just due to the backlash of the Jewish community trying to silence her opinions on Israel.
Well, can I make a comment?
Has risen her to national prominence.
Well,
so even Brenda Lawrence,
that doesn't matter.
She's probably the best known congresswoman from all of Michigan. Like, if you think of who has been on national news.
Well, can I make a comment? Because it becomes an issue of people exploiting the Black African American experience for their own political and financial gain. So to answer Young Cush's question, is very much carpetbagging, because you have to remember the Democratic South at the time, which was the party of slavery, instituted all these double standards of Jim Crow, and every other racialized policy that they had at the time. And I just think that she will lose, and she is defeatable, because the election that she came into power is questionable. It's believed widely in political circles that she cheated to win. And Brenda Jones, the first time beat her in one election and lose in another. So yeah, the African American community have to take their voice back from people like Rashida Tlaib, who's trying to take the community in the direction that they don't need to go, because she's clearly not in the interest economically and politically of African Americans. I don't care what she said.
Yeah, I think she's going to be one of the stars of the Congress. She's going to have one of the best name recognition of anyone in the country, largely due to the Jewish Democrats trying to force her out. That has led to her getting explosive media attention. She's already the most well-known, name-recognized congressperson.
But that's by social engineering. That's strictly an indignant and indifferent position to recognize what's real and what's true on the ground. Like, her policies in particular, instead of serving the people in the 13th district, why does the state of Israel have to be such a large part of her conversation? Granted, she's Palestinian. We get that. That's a personal issue. But when you are elected by the people, your first agenda is to serve the people. And the United States and Israel are not hostile countries. So there's no threat there. And politically, I just see it as unintelligible. These are people who are trying to shape the narrative and bend the agenda to their own personal whims.
Okay. Yeah, we don't have to go back and forth, but I'll make the other point one last time about also the fact that the Black Caucus is basically out of date and out of touch with the younger generation, and that it's unlikely that these old school politicians that have been lifelong politicians are going to move out of the way for a younger crew. So to say, okay, Tlaib might not be the best representative of African Americans in Detroit, but comparatively to what the Black Caucus has done for the needs of blacks in this area
That's
for
a
decades
legitimate
and
question.
decades, it's likely that they're just going to keep on putting these candidates like Conyers, that they're going to serve till they die, and none of them are going to move to this newer progressive agenda that's probably going to be more popular. And even like, okay, Brenda Jones is more representative of the old school, like Biden Democrats, and it's unlikely that she's going to garner widespread interest. If you could get like a Ilhan Omar type person to be against Tlaib.
Well, let me make a comment
but it doesn't look like they're going to have.
I disagree with that totally.
Person that represents an uninteresting past of the Democratic Party.
No, you made the first part was correct. Like the older guard is out of touch, but faces like Rashida Tlaib are not reflective of the African American struggle, so people are not going to trust her. She's considered to be white on paper, as her particular demographic is. So therefore, that's a huge stumbling block when it comes to unilateral success. And like Ilhan Omar is another terrible example of a woman that has color, but is not of color because she's not associated with the civil rights struggles, Martin Luther King Jr., all the things that make the African American community what they are. Like these two individuals were absent from that. And so definitely that has to be always at the forefront because it's a misappropriation of African American civil rights and political votes. The African American community's vote is not for sale, and I just have to emphasize that because outsiders would assume a different posture than insiders.
What about just the basic Jewish issue of the Jews that do not live in her district, do not live in Detroit, trying to meddle in the election and get rid of her will backfire on the institutionalized Jewish community when Jews from Oakland County are trying to meddle in the elections of her district and trying to get her out, that's likely to backfire.
Well, I disagree with that because these so-called activists, a lot of them are outsiders too. They don't have residency in Detroit. A small minority do, but at the same token, they are detached from the issues because they still possess
I'm not talking
white
about
privilege.
The small amount of Jews that live in her district. I'm talking
I'm
talking about institutionalized Judaism within their power in the Democratic Party that does not live in her district to make it an issue that they want to meddle in her district in order to force her out.
Well, what I'm saying is the majority of people that advocate...
That's a good idea. You're on their side. You'll be helping them?
No.
Or do you see what I'm saying? That it will backfire. It will backfire on the...
But I'm saying the majority of the activists that are pro-Tlaib are not also residents of the district that she live in.
That's irrelevant.
They are meddling in the election.
That's irrelevant.
They may live in Detroit, but they don't live in her district. And
that's irrelevant to the question.
No, it's not irrelevant. Until they possess a Detroit voters card, then they have a say. But everything else is just moral support.
Well, I'm not trying to meddle one way or another. That's why I'm neutral. I'm just commenting.
Well, yeah, it's just like the other side.
The article that the main priority of the Jewish community, of the Federation, of the major donors, is to try to get Tlaib out of office. And I do think that's going to backfire on them. It's a bad idea.
I think they're going to be successful because she's not skilled enough to know how to fend off all the factual evidence that they have on her. It's layers of complexity. Until she can do that, and deliver on results, fiscal results, and financial opportunities, and who's willing to partner with her. I think the prominent politicians are not willing to partner with her, like the Mary Sheffields, the Brenda Lawrences, everybody else that holds rank in Detroit is not on her side. That's what you got to realize, is that there are a few, and her voice in the media is just basically that of a talking head. It's pretty irritating to see that the national media can be that indignant and continue to put her in a position to where we got to hear her ignorant comments, because it's not based on any factual intelligence.
Okay, so is any other issues? We've been at for like an hour and a half. Maybe next week or the next time we stream, we'll talk about buying real estate in Detroit or something, unless there's a pressing issue to talk about, and we'll see the reaction. Anyone that had a question in the chat that didn't get asked, just do a quick @Duvid so we could hear your comment, or else I'll leave it to DeShean to give him a chance to say anything he didn't have a chance to say.
Well, no, I'm pretty situated. I just want to make sure things come out factually as they are. It's up to each individual to represent their particular viewpoint, but let's just bring the facts out as they are. And I just think that's intelligent discourse. Whether you yay or nay really don't matter. It's all about the presentation.
Yeah, I'm more about the analysis. At the end of the day, I'm largely apolitical. I try to work together with people. Like, no matter who the people choose, I'm going to try to work together with them. I do have my feelings and predictions that that I gave, or my analysis.
I understand.
But yeah, I always try to understand
that.
Both sides of the issue. Usually there's logic and reason for people to be on either side of the issue. And, so hopefully we'll continue and have more streaming. So I gave out some wrenches here. Hopefully there'll also be more interaction moving forward to, but if there's not enough of an interest in these political discussions or our opinions on politics, maybe it'd be more worthwhile next time if we tried doing something about Detroit, like how to move to Detroit, how to buy real estate in Detroit, how to open up a business in Detroit, as opposed to political analysis. So we'll see about that moving forward, and look forward to your comments and feedback, and we'll keep you posted with further discussions.
Fair enough. Thank you all for tuning in, and see you on the next show. It's like, I think